maybe I hate my city right now. Maybe there's construction all over my street. The subway is never on time. Maybe there are so many cabs all over the street, I can't even cross the street without being afraid of being hit, and it's raining and my umbrella just broke, and just kind of all of these. I'm just thinking of like kind of my worst day in New York.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Defense Never Rests. I am your host today, Megan Henry, and today I'm joined again by Sherry Belitz of Sherry Belitz Communication. She's been on a number of times, but also joining us today is Chris Dickerson, who works for the city of New York and has worked there for a number of years. And you know, I really wanted to have him and Sherry on because they are both New Yorkers. They love New York. They have such a passion for the city. But also, you know, Chris has a different perspective because he works at the city of New York, and defending a public entity is much different from private entity. So I wanted to talk to both of them about the implications of that. So with that said, let's bring them in. Good morning, Chris and Sherry. Welcome to The Defense Never Rests. I'm so excited to have you on this morning. And for our listeners today, we're here to talk about really Chris Dickerson, who's been with the city of New York for, I don't know, Chris, how many years have you been with the city?
24.
So 24 years, which is so impressive. And I congratulate you on that. That's amazing. But, you know, I defend a lot of private entities. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is not only just Chris and his career, but how defending a private entity is a little bit different from a public entity. And Sherry's here to weigh in on how that, that can affect, prepping your witnesses and, the perception of the jury. So having said all that, let's get in and just talk to Chris. So I brought Sherry's a good friend of mine, and I had mentioned I talked to you a few weeks ago, and she said, "Oh my God, he's a legend." And I said, "Well then, you're coming on." So with that, now you have to live up to, the picture that Sherry's painted for you. But how did you start your career as an attorney?
Well, number one, I'm not an attorney.
Okay.
So I started in this business, in this industry, about 35 years ago. I'm younger than what you think, or older than what you think. So initially, I started doing this kind of work when I worked for AT&T. And in AT&T, they had a claims administration office. And what they did there was handle mostly business claims, but then we also had personal injury claims for injuries that happened in the office or in sidewalks. And they asked me if I would do that, and I said, sure. It sounded interesting. So I started doing it, and it was interesting. And I liked negotiating. I liked talking and working with good lawyers, such as you guys. And so I stayed in that field until they offered me an early retirement at 16 years. And I said, okay, I'll take that. So I was pretty young. And I took the early retirement. They offered to pay for my schooling, the rest of my schooling, and a 2-year salary. And I thought that was a good deal. So I took that. And then after about a year and a half or so, I went to I was living in Denver at the time. I moved to Los Angeles, Santa Monica, which I loved, and I got a job with TWA. And so they wanted me to do the same kinds of things. And so I worked in claims administration there. They put me on the emergency response team, which fortunately I never had to do, which is when a plane crashes, you have to rush to the site, start doing the claim, start trying to compensate people or the survivors and the families and take care of that aspect of it. Like I said, fortunately, I never had to do that. But I really love working for TWA because for a lot of the younger people, maybe you guys too, TWA stands for Trans World Airlines. That was an airline back in the day. They were bought by not recently, a few years ago by American. So they folded into American. And so claims there, I had to travel around the world. They would say, we have a claim, somebody got hurt in Paris and we need you to go. And I said, okay, because I love to travel. So I went to Paris and Asia, and I went to Israel once, South America and North America. And I really loved that. I did that for about 5 years. And then they went bankrupt, or they're considering bankruptcy. And they moved our headquarters, which was here in Mount Kisco, New York, to St. Louis. And they asked me if I wanted to go to St. Louis. And I said, no, nothing against St. Louis. I don't want like Michael Young to get mad at me. But I didn't want to move there after living in Denver and LA and New York. So I said, thanks. So they said, okay. And they gave me a 2-year pass. So I got to do free traveling on my own. And I was here in New York. So after a while, I got 2 or 3 months, I got a job with Archdiocese of New York, Roman Catholic entity, one of the major, if not the major, Catholic entity in America. And same thing. They said, we would like for you to do claims and administer our claims and make sure it's all working fine. And I said, okay, it sounded interesting. I'm not Catholic, but a little bit, I'm spiritual, I guess. And so I welcome that challenge. I did that for not that long, about 3 years. Things were happening there. This was right at the beginning of the pre-still abuse claims. And at first I just couldn't believe it. I said, there's just no way. But sure enough, that was true. And so we still had to deal with those. I didn't really like the way that things were being handled. So I was recruited at that time when I was there to come to the city in New York and do the same thing here by my former boss, who's now retired. So I said, okay, I left the Archdiocese and I came to the city. And I first came as a consultant because they wanted to try and see, to get a handle on claims, because the city wasn't really doing much on claims or insurance-wise. They were just paying the claims. So my boss said, there's got to be a better way than this. He's a very, very bright attorney, and we became pretty good friends. So I came here as a consultant for a couple years, and sure enough, I didn't really think the city was handling their claims and their contracts and insurance requirements that well, if at all. And so we started to put together a practice wherein we were going to get insurance coverage on these cases, whatever they would do. And we had to fix a couple of things. We had to work with the comptroller's office. The comptroller, if you're going to sue the city, you have to file a notice of claim against the city with the comptroller. That gives them the time to investigate it and set it up and all that. So we started with the comptroller. At that time, we were getting late notice by insurance companies all the time. They would just say late notice because they knew that we weren't, ready for that or practicing that yet. So we had to fix that with the comptroller. We had to fix our contracts because they were kind of vague and sometimes ambiguous. And we said, no. If we're paying these contractors all this money, we need strong contracts and strong insurance language. So we put that in there. And so we started administering that. I had to meet with some of the city agencies. For instance, ACS stands for Administration for Children's Services. They handle our foster care cases, and there were just horrendous cases in the papers all the time and on the news about things that happen. It turns out that we have contracts with outside agencies. For instance, Catholic Charities. or the Jewish Society, all of these different entities that the city couldn't do on its own. So they contracted out to these agencies, and the agencies would then place the child, we hope, in an appropriate home. Well, that necessarily wasn't happening, and then the insurance aspects weren't great either. So we met with all of the agencies. We had them come in, and we explained to them that there's a new day. We're going to start handling these a little bit or a lot differently, so that we all get insurance coverage, not just for you, but for us as the city. And we pay billions of dollars on these contracts. And I just couldn't understand why we never got insurance coverage. And so we educated them, and they started giving us notices in time and putting the carriers on notice in time, letting me know so I then would follow up with the carriers. And great things started to happen. The city hired, the agency, ACS, hired lots of more professional social workers, things like that. And to cut their workload down, the agency started hiring a lot more professionals and paying much more attention to the stuff. And now it's really, really doing much better. So that's something I feel really good about. We don't get nearly as many claims. Of course, I have 2 kids, and I love, or they're not kids now, they're women. And I love children. So that was important to me, that be handled properly. So that's where we started. And then we looked at other problem areas for the city that just weren't getting enough attention insurance-wise. For instance, we looked at traffic signals throughout the city. Every accident, they always blame the city. You know, we said, the traffic light wasn't working, there was nobody there, and on and on and on. And the city was paying those claims. And I'm like, no. we paid the contractors, again, billions of dollars,
right,
to maintain our traffic signals, the street posts, the street lamps, and all of that. And so we're going to start going and getting insurance coverage for this. And so we met with the traffic signal companies, told them the same thing. It's a new day, we're going to start doing this differently. A lot of resistance from the carriers.
Right.
And so we had to do lots and lots of DJs. Finally, they said, we're tired of losing these DJs. So let's try and work out something. And so we worked out something with them. We only notice them, the carriers, when there is what I think is a valid claim. If we have a whole system, Department of Transportation has a whole system wherein, and it's automatic these days, for the traffic signals, how they work, what they're supposed to do, whether the contractor was noticed. Once in a while, a contractor's not noticed, and if we didn't notice them, then that's on us. And so I don't tender those, but most of the time we do notice them, and then they have a certain amount of time to get there and fix the problem. And so it's gotten much better. Don't see nearly as many claims on that either. But there's still some, but we don't see many of those.
Well, it seems like, you came in to the city at a time that they needed, a lot of help and a lot of change. And you kind of used, you almost redirected and got things on track. That's what I'm hearing, at least. Do you agree, Sherry?
I would absolutely agree. It does. The city needs Chris, and Chris is, it's funny. I always think of Chris. It was good hearing about your whole career, because I always think of you as the quintessential New Yorker. And that's one of the things Chris and I actually bonded over, is our love of the city and our love of everything New York, from the Yankees to the food to downtown, really all of it. So it was kind of interesting to hear a little bit about the before years. So.
Yeah. So, and touching on that, I, when you were talking about working for TWA, which made me chuckle a little bit when when I was growing up. My mom was a travel agent, and she would always have like calendars from airlines, and I always called it TWA at the time because we had a TWA calendar in our kitchen. But anyway, besides that, how was it those international claims? And I'd love to hear Sherry weigh in on this too. Like, how does that? And I know it was years ago, but how does that weigh in differently with, as to litigating the claim and resolving the claim when you're dealing with something that happened in France or somewhere internationally? Like, how is it different for you?
Well, instead of having New York-based or American-based attorneys defend cases and consulting and working with them, we would have to hire French counsel.
Right.
For instance. And so as far as international law and all of that, we got to know a little bit, but we kind of left that up to them. Basically, most of the time, I'm going to say 90% of the time, what the plaintiff wanted was a free ticket. So seriously.
That's so easily resolved.
Yeah, we were like, no, you can do that.
Ticket to where, though?
Anywhere. We would give them a free ticket wherever they wanted to go. And they had a year to travel, and it could even be extended if they couldn't do that. So a lot of these cases did not have to go litigate through the system. We would have to answer, we would counsel answer, we fly over, we negotiate, and then most of those cases would settle with a free ticket.
Yeah.
If it didn't work, then we would end up settling all of those cases. We never went to trial for whatever amount of money that it took. Most of the time, it was never over 100,000.
Now, with that, and I know I'm going to be overgeneralizing, but these individuals that are just looking for the free ticket, did you happen to see that there are more non-U.S. citizens? Like, is the U.S. just that much more litigious that we want money versus we just want a ticket to fly someplace else?
Yes. It's far more litigious than anywhere or America. And New York is double wherever else I've been as far as lawsuits and claims and all of that. I think there's way too many lawyers in New York.
Yeah.
They would take cases that I wouldn't take. But,
what do you see on that, Sherry? As far as the litigious nature between the U.S. and as Chris mentioned, New York, do you find that New York is in your work that much worse?
You know what? I'm going to answer this question how. I probably
it depends.
Like sort of a lawyer, sort of a psychologist. It depends, and it's my bias because I've been a New Yorker for 25 years. So of course, this is confirmation bias. This is what I'm seeing in my newspapers. This is like local news that I'm getting. So of course, it's going to look like from my eyes that New York is that much more litigious. Do I see some crazy lawsuits all over the country? I do. But again, my bias, I just get called in for those larger lawsuits. So I'm not going to know about all the slip and falls that are happening in New Mexico or all of the smaller cases that may be going on in Iowa, whereas in New York, I, really have my finger on the pulse. I know what's going on just from reading the local news and talking to friends like Chris and local attorneys that I work with. So yes, it always seems like New York is more litigious, but I wanted to kind of give you that biased view through my lens.
I mean, I feel from my experience, again, I think I'm biased because most of my practice is in the Philadelphia region, that, Philadelphia is awfully litigious versus other areas. So maybe it's just the metropolitan areas that get the larger impact of that. And maybe it's a sheer volume of people that, you get more numbers. There's more people So there's more lawsuits.
I was going to say there is a greater group dynamic. People are living close together. People are traveling close together. Infrastructure gets worn down, like Chris probably knows, like every pothole, every construction site. It's just, it's a more crowded way of living. I love it. I think Chris does probably as well. We've lived here a long time. I feel like it's like New York. You kind of love it or hate this kind of living. I thrive and get my energy from it, but it definitely lends itself to a lot of litigation. I mean, I have neighbors complaining all the time, like if someone's loud or someone's bouncing a ball or someone's, in our backyard shared area. And then don't start me on the subway when it's too crowded. Like we've both probably seen some crazy things. And of course, there's always something under construction in New York, and I would assume most metropolitan areas. So I do think it's a numbers issue. I do think it's people are living a lot closer, and you just have a group dynamic that's kind of unusual when you think about other areas of the country where you're spaced out a little further.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes people forget about that, and I think, people will say there's so many lawsuits in here. But then when you think about it, there's probably 8 million in the metro area or in the city, and then 20 in the metro area. And then we have all of these 20 million, and then we have all these visitors so who come here. And so really percentage-wise, it's probably very, very small of the amount of lawsuits that we get versus the amount of people. Our job, of course, is to handle those, and it seems like a lot. But I remind people that, last year there was 20 million people that vacationed in New York, and so we have 2,000 claims.
Yeah,
it's a very small percentage.
Well, and if you think about though the sheer volume of concrete that you have throughout the city, and the number of people walking over that concrete, and someone trips and falls on a allegedly broken curb, they're going to sue the property owner, the tenant, and the city. And think how, just the volume of area plus people, that's just going to exponentially increase the number of suits, because the city, is always going to be joined in that. You're always going to be a defendant in that, or more likely than not, I would say, than always.
I think you're right. And similar to what Sherry was saying, the city is always doing construction. The city spends $20 to $30 billion a year on construction of various projects, most of the infrastructure projects. But we build, we did a whole remodeling or revamping of our park system. Now you can bicycle all the way around Manhattan, these very beautiful parks. Well, to get there, a lot of construction for that.
Right.
And then the city also does all this social services stuff, which I'm just amazed at how much the city spends on social services, foster care, community development. They do a lot of that. And so that exposes you to a lot of claims. And the infrastructure is major because we do the street milling, and those are probably the most cases I see. We have to come up with something to deal with those, because the city goes through and they repave the streets. They have to pull up the asphalt, and they repave it, and it's very labor intensive, and it's frankly kind of a mess while they're pulling on the asphalt up. And so we get all of these unwitnessed claims where people tripped and fell, allegedly on a street. So we have contractors for that too. And so I'm trying to think about, what we're going to do. We pay these guys a ton of money. Included in that is the insurance. And we're trying to figure out how we're going to have to deal with those. So we'll deal with those right now.
Yeah. Well, you're almost damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? Because if you don't do the repairs and you have the construction, then there's going to be, complaints about, people falling on broken, falling apart concrete, whatever it may be. If you do it, then you get people complaining that, one, there's construction, it takes longer to get from point A to point B, but also, then you have the open up liability of construction casualty lawsuits. And, it's every angle there's potential, liability for you.
Exactly right, Megan. And for instance, in foster care, if you hear, or a doctor or a teacher or somebody hears or thinks there might be abuse, and the city investigates it and finds out that there was not any, or we don't have any evidence, they call it unfounded. And then immediately after that, the child is abused or killed in worst cases I've seen. We're sued for that. So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah.
So it's that way in most all of this stuff. And you just have to do the best that you can. And we actually are doing a pretty good job. I've had counsel from Houston, Texas, Los Angeles, and Chicago come in and visit us and see what we're doing.
Really? Good for you. Well, I actually wanted to touch on the foster care point because I mean, those have to be, they're such heartbreaking cases to defend and to be up against. And I kind of want to direct this to you, Sherry, in your work, I mean, I'm sure you've come across these types of cases and have that big emotional aspect to them. And how do you see that plays in the emotional aspect of, an abuse situation in a foster care will play towards, a private and public entity? Like, who do you think is sitting better or has a better defense, so to speak, when you have those emotions running high?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, Megan. And right before we started this podcast, where I knew we were going to be talking about public entities versus private entities, I was kind of going on in my head and thinking a little bit, just kind of comparing the two with respect to juror perception and with respect to litigation and litigation strategy. And it's a very interesting type of situation when you have a city sued and you have people from that city who are on your jury, because think about that in the private world. That would be as if a corporation was sued and everyone on that jury worked at that corporation. So if the city is sued and I'm sitting on the jury, I'm someone with, and everyone else is someone, you sort of have almost an inherent conflict of interest. And you have to really approach your witnesses, and especially in these abuse cases, there's whole other layers to that. And if we're talking about children and we're talking about something like cross-examination, that's kind of a whole other layer. But the analysis with the public and private is you have a jury of New Yorkers, and New York is a defendant. So you're really going to want to query the jury about their feelings about the city. And you may find that there are some very, very positive feelings. Chris and I have talked about, not in the context of litigation, but we've talked about just our love for this city and everything our city has been through. And we've both been through 9/11 and the financial crisis, Occupy Wall Street, now living through this pandemic. And, as you see, Chris is at work, I'm at home. So he's even more so probably taking transit and really living the life of a real New Yorker. And you have a special love for your city, whether it's New York or whether it's another city. So you have that sympathy factor for the defendant city on your jury, which is much better than if you're talking about a corporation, because you're not going to have an employee of that corporation sitting on that jury. They're going to get kicked off for cause. But if you think about it, when a city is sued, you have all of the people who have some type of stake, but you're going to also have some more developed worldviews and attitudes where someone might not have such a strong feeling about a certain corporation. Let's say Johnson & Johnson is a defendant in a case. I may not have such a strong feeling one way or another, but you can bet if my city is on trial, I'm going to have a strong feeling. Maybe I hate my city right now. Maybe there's construction all over my street, and there are rats, and this has happened. Maybe there's garbage all over the street. Maybe the subway is never on time. Maybe there are so many cabs all over the street, I can't even cross the street without being afraid of being hit, and it's raining and my umbrella just broke, and just kind of all of these. I'm just thinking of like kind of my worst day in New York, and Chris can probably confirm, you have these days where you're like, I hate this city. So
move into the country.
Exactly. So you have attitudes where jurors will completely understand frustrations of that big city living, but you're going to also really have, as far as humanizing, we talk about humanizing the corporate defendant, you're going to really have an interesting dynamic there when you have a longtime resident of that city on a jury. And that's something you're going to want to ask too. New York, like many cities, they're transient cities. Chris and I are a little bit of an anomaly that we've lived here so long. And I think that's why we have a bond about how much we love this place. But, there are people, maybe they're here for school for a couple years. Maybe they want to try out that big job for a couple of years. Maybe they want to experience city living for a couple of years. So it's going to be very important to query them on that. So back to those abuse cases, that is a whole other layer. And there's a really big pretrial publicity component with those cases. So there are cases, Chris and I probably remember the same ones that are on the reel on New York One, that are the front page of the Post, where maybe they were investigated and nothing came up, and everything was deemed okay, and then a child was beaten to death, or a child suffered some sort of tragedy at the hands of the parents or the caregivers or the family. And those are the cases we see on the news. I'm sure Chris sees soup to nuts in his job, but those are the cases that your jury pool is going to see on the news. So you have a whole pretrial publicity component. Yeah. And so you really have a lot of layers. So you, to really sum up, my short answer, as I like to say, to sum up, you're going to have an unusual jury when you're talking about the city of New York or the city of anywhere as a defendant, because you are going to have people who have a real stake in that litigation, taxpayers, people that live there. They're going to have real opinions and worldviews and attitudes. This is not just like that detached corporation. And then, of course, the big high-profile abuse cases where something catastrophic happens, you have that pretrial publicity component. And then, of course, cases with children, cases with abuse, you have a whole different approach, a whole different strategy to litigation anyway, when you're talking depositions, when you're talking cross-examination, when you're talking about that. This is very different than a construction case. So again, as I like to say, that's my short answer.
Well, and that, I mean, I never thought of it that way. And I'm so glad you kind of spelled it out, because I just didn't think of it that your jury is going to be the members of your corporation, so to speak. And I think, it would really change kind of how you pick your jury depending on, as it does in any case, depending on the facts. But I think, as you described your most terrible day walking through the city, and if you have, say, like a trip and fall on a curb or something, you want to be real careful about how those people feel about the city, because they might be like, yeah, man, every day I walk through and, this happens and this happens, and they just might be overly biased in a negative way, even if it's the city that they love.
Absolutely. And you also want to think about, I'm just going to compare myself to some neighbors that I used to have. I think it's a really good comparison because I've been in New York for 25 years. Clearly, I've seen some stuff here. Clearly, I love this city if I've been here for that long. My neighbors came from New Orleans. They just came here for a little bit to kind of experience it. They're a little bit younger. Their kids went to private school. My kids go to public school. Things like that are going to show, I don't want to say you can't be invested in your city if you happen to go to private school or Catholic school or whatever it is, but things like that will kind of show your attitudes about the city. So those are questions you're going to want to ask in voir dire. Those are things that you're going to want to have in mind. Like I would probably rather have, and again, I'm completely generalizing. I have no idea what kind of hypothetical case we're talking about, but you see these kind of like just long-term New Yorkers who have been here forever, who have seen everything, done everything. They see the naked cowboy walk by. They don't even look a second time because been there, done that. They see celebrities, kind of nothing phases them. I'm going to want them rather than the person who is here for the experience. Maybe they're, doing a couple years in New York for a large company. They'll move on somewhere else. And again, very case specific, but I'm just kind of giving you like a general gestalt picture of that New York juror that I think is going to have a personal stake in the city.
What do you think, Chris? Do you agree?
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I'm just kind of, I guess, not surprised at Sherry's brilliance, but but that is it. What she said is so true. And you have to be very careful when you're picking your jury, because us old timers, I about the same time as Sherry, and I came here. My California friends and my Colorado friends said, you're gonna hate New York. People are mean. It's too crowded. Blah blah blah. And I got here, looked around, went, I love this place. There's so much to do here, and on and on. And so I love New York. But when you have a case and it's gonna try, you do want to try and find out from your jury what their feelings are for the city. Most old timers like us love the city, but there are people who are very mad at the city for whatever reason. Our Department of Education is not the most loved. I think they're doing a great job, but that is something that is just very, very sensitive to a lot of people. And they may hate Department of Education, so you wouldn't want that kind of a person on your jury. Police, I happen to think that we have a great police force. I see these guys talk to people that a cop in New York wouldn't bother, or in Colorado wouldn't bother talking to them. They're in a car, number one, and they just drive by. Here in New York, I've seen interactions, and I think our police are great. However, you have the instances where things happen, and we had one instance where a police officer, a couple of them, decided to use a broomstick on a guy. I don't know if you remember that, but it was very, very ugly. And so a case like that, you're not going to try. I would recommend that you not try that, unless the demand is just outrageous. You're going to have to settle those. So police, you got to be careful. But I think most New Yorkers love the police here. I really do. I live in Harlem. I see the police all the time, and I'm happy to see the police. And they interact well with the community, to my knowledge, best as I see. And I'm around all over Harlem, and we don't have a whole lot of instances. But so I think it's true. I think most New Yorkers love and respect the police. But in a case like that, first of all, can't get insurance coverage. We actually priced that. We asked, we went out and sought bids on how much coverage we could get and how much it would cost for the whole city. And the carriers came back and said $2 billion a year. And we said, we don't pay that much out. And we don't. We pay typically, mostly for non-covered cases, between 500 million and a billion. And so we said, no, we don't want to do that. We'll just handle our claims the way that we do and do the best that we can. So my short answer to what Sherry said is I'm amazed by her brilliance, and I would like to use. I was thinking of her services in defending cases, but maybe as a trial consultant or something. Some way we've got to get your assistance there.
Everyone needs some Sherry in their life.
Yeah,
it would be
to do these lyrics and sing and be happy. I don't know how she does it.
I will have to say, so when I met Chris, and I've actually met him, Chris, I met you in person, like very, very briefly, like way before the pandemic, but we really formed a bond online by being on LinkedIn so much and just kind of getting to chat. And I think you really know people in depth. And one of the very first things that I thought about Chris was like, wow, this is someone who really loves this city. This person loves this city, maybe even more than me, because the city is his employer too. And wow, like this is one of the greatest jobs in the world to be passionate about your city and where you live. And that's absolutely how I feel about New York. I always say, you know, I'll leave New York feet first. And and that's the truth for, you know, my feelings about this city. And for him to be able to work for this great city every day, and to even say that, you know, you would love to work together, like to me, that would be, I mean, my best. I love all my clients. I love my insurance company clients, my law firm clients, but to have the city of New York as a client would be just dream come true.
Oh, I can't wait for that.
Yeah. So
I really do love the city. I think it's amazing. The things that it does and the things that we can do. And you can walk over here and see the ocean, and over here to see the beautiful Hudson River, and over here to see the East River, which is actually beautiful too. So, and then we have Central Park, and yeah, so I do. And I love to work with people that love the city, because I know you're going to get your best effort from them and from me. And so we're going to figure it out. We're going to, and if you're ever over here, Megan, we can get you too.
I remember, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I ran into someone from college years ago on the subway, and we were both going to the Bronx. I was going to an internship up there, and I said to her, you know, Jules, where are you going? And she said, oh, I have a job at Yankee Stadium. Like I'm doing publicity for and I said, you know what? You're the only one that's the only better job than the city. Maybe Chris is working for the Yankees. That's like dream job. But I think we'd both agree on that, right? That's number one.
We agree on that. And actually, I have a very close relationship with the legal staff of the Yankees, because
I'm in.
We do get sued up there, and we have a very, very great relationship with the Yankees. So not only do they have a great team, and they have a great legal staff who also loves the city, I would think just about as much as you and I.
Yeah.
They really, really do love the city. And of course, the Yankee fan base is from all over, but we have a lot of New York City people that love the Yankees too. So we have a really, really great relationship with them, Sherry. So I definitely have to keep that in mind.
Oh, keep that in mind. You know, hey, I mean, like Red Sox game or something at the state, there's gonna be legal problems. The city's getting brought into something. I've seen lit cigarettes thrown at Boston Yankee games. So we almost need like courts up there, like in Philadelphia.
The old Eagle Stadium.
Yeah, I think we maybe we need some courts up there.
I do think that maybe they don't have that. I think that was the old stadium, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm
not a bad idea.
Yeah, it might not be a terrible idea to have that in pretty much in any stadium.
Speaking of Philadelphia, I remember, I'm a football fan too, and I remember years ago in a game, the fans there were throwing snowballs at Santa Claus.
Yeah, that is the story.
I couldn't believe that. Who would throw snowballs at Santa Claus?
Well, maybe they didn't get what they wanted that year.
Yeah, they were losing, and they weren't coping. So, but I love Philadelphia. It's a beautiful city. People have this image of it, but it's actually a beautiful city.
No, Philly's great. And I mean, I'm not a Philly native, so I didn't grow up here or anything. But I'm very, very happy with it. I think it has everything that I need at least. So, and thinking of that, just in general, city defending, Philadelphia or the city of New York, and this might be more directed to Sherry, but Chris, I'd love for you to chime in too. Like, how do you humanize a city? Because you hear a lot about humanizing corporations. When the city is a defendant, do you draw the jurors into the things that they just love or they should love about the city? Because it's different, right, than an independent corporation.
I think it is a much easier thing to do to humanize a city than to humanize a corporation, for sure. The city I think of as a person already. I may not think of a corporation necessarily as a person, but as a long time New Yorker, I certainly think of the city as a person. And right now, I weep for the city. Like when the pandemic hit last year, I was sad for the city. So I'm already coming in with that bias where I'm almost even, I would say, through everything we've been through to the day-to-day things like the aggravation of, that subway's taking too long and look how crowded it is and it just is kind of standing still. You just sort of look at around in amazement, like you have all of these people, like how are things not going to go a little wrong? You have crowds of people. You have, as Chris said, 20 million tourists when we're not in a pandemic environment. And I think just explaining that, and you already have a jury who understands that for the most part. Maybe, not if they're a transient person and you'd want to suss that out in voir dire, but if they are a person that has lived here, I remember one judge said, after 10 years, you're a real New Yorker. So, and I think I was upset. I had only lived for 8 years or something. And I was like, oh my God, I hope nobody finds this out. So, but anyway, I think people are very understanding. I mean, there are some crazy things that happens. Chris sees them a lot more than I do, like a branch of a tree can break off, and it has in parks after storms, and has hurt people or killed people, or scaffolding falls, or just really terrible things. I think last year, and I don't know if the city was brought in, there was a brick fell on a woman's head. I mean, these unbelievable stories. But I think it's just that much easier to humanize the city than it is the construction company or the, if it's a corporation that gets pulled into a suit, because people really understand, if they've lived here, what this city's been through. And I think you think of the city as a person. I know I think of the city as a person, and I, right now it's not going through a great time, and there's garbage all over the street and construction, and I don't get angry, I get sad. So there's a big emotional component, and I think it is a lot easier to humanize a city to a jury of people that live there than a corporation. And I'm curious as to Chris's perspective.
I agree 100% with you in that regard. For example, the city is required by statute to do above and beyond provide services for the homeless here, and we have a problem with that. We are spending at last I count, almost $3 billion a year to come up with solutions. You want to have shelters. I have several shelters up where I live, but a lot of people don't want those in the neighborhood. We have to. It was so bad, and it's still pretty bad, that we have turned hotels into shelters, or we've contracted with hotels that will temporarily provide shelter for the homeless until the pandemic until we survive through that. So the city is doing so much more to provide service for the homeless and the mentally ill. In fact, I had a case where the city of Denver, my hometown, sent a homeless lady to New York. They bought her a bus ticket. They said, New York's going to do way more for you than we will, and you need to go there. And so she did. She came to New York, moved into a shelter, got into a fight, and sued us. There you go. But
you can't even make that stuff.
You can't make it up. It's so amazing. But you can talk about the different services that the city does and tries to provide to a New Yorker, especially on a trial. And a lot of people know that. They may not know the extent of what the city is doing, but they realize that this is their city and they're doing the best that they can to address all of the various things that can happen in the city. Whereas if you have, and I know you guys have insurance companies, and I actually have great relationships with a lot of insurance companies, but it's much easier to say, well, I'm going to sue ABC Insurance because everybody knows what insurance does, and nobody has great sympathy for them versus the city. So yeah, I think you can humanize that and use that to your advantage or disadvantage if they have a problem with the city.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point too, because you really you're highlighting to a jury that this is the place that you love. And I think a lot of it comes down to like what Sherry was talking about earlier with how you pick that jury and how you find the people who truly are true to from the city. They have to be there for, I guess, 10 years, right? And that's check the box number one.
As per the judge.
The first question of one year, how long have you lived here? 10 years or longer. So, but one of the challenges, switching gears real quick, one of the challenges that I at least I see on my end for you, Chris, as the city just has just a sheer volume of cases, and how are your attorneys able to give their cases attention, or that much attention, when they just have stacks and stacks of cases to attend to?
No, that's a great question. We have right now around 21,000 open cases, and we have about 900 lawyers, and so if you do the math, they're swamped.
Yeah,
so they work hard. We have great lawyers here, but that workload is pretty heavy for them. So I think that the average lawyer coming here, let's say out of law school, probably averages around 4 years. They have to stay for 3, and then they can leave. And I think mostly because that's just an intense workload, and you may not get be able to provide the attention to a particular case that you would want. Having said that, they do a pretty good job. Part of what I do is get referrals from our in-house lawyers on cases they think, there might be insurance, and I'm just bombarded all the time with that. And I'm like, that happened in 12 years ago. Now you're contacting me, and they're like, well, we were just reviewing this, and I'm like, it's not their fault. It's just around for them, and we try. So one thing I do like is when I do get coverage, I can give it to an outside firm where they will have a dedicated attorney to that case or two, and they can put a lot more time and attention into the case than what we could. And so And there's the billable hours aspect where they're gonna work that case. And so you get that. So I try and move as many cases as I can from internally, externally to outside via insurance.
Yeah. So are you a lot of the times looking at almost like a risk transfer situation that there's coverage for, so you can get out of under the city's umbrella, so to speak?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's probably my number one priority, and part of that is because we pay these contractors billions of dollars, and any contractor that's worth their salt is going to include in their bid the cost of insurance. So this is why I tell insurance companies when they're mad at me, like, why are you coming to me? I'm like, well, we paid ABC Construction $10 billion to build a tunnel for us. Of that $10 billion, $1 billion was for insurance. So I'm actually paying you, insurance company, to defend us. You should be honored. And they're like, well, if you want to put it that way, but no. So we will have that discussion. But it's true. Your insurance costs are input into your bid. And so you're the named insured, but you're required to make us additional insured for anything that happens that arose from your work. And so most of these, especially labor law claims, or if they're building a school for us and teacher falls on some construction debris, I'm going to say we're additional insured, and we should be covered for that. And a lot of most of the insurance companies will say, okay, we will buy that. It can get complex because they can say it wasn't us, it was a subcontractor to the subcontractor, a plumber or carpenter or something. I'm like, that's fine, I can try for them, but the contract is with you. And so you should pick this up, and then you should do the risk transferring down the line, and I will assist you. But number one, it's going to be on you.
Yeah. And anytime with those construction contracts, though, it does get complicated because it is always a sub of a sub of a sub. And then without a doubt, the last sub has no insurance. Like it's just how it flows. It's like insured, zero.
Some of these carriers that will provide coverage to the sub of a sub of a sub will say there's no insurance for anybody outside of you, and for you there's barely insurance. So when I come to them, they're like, well, there's an employee exclusion. I'm like, what? An employee exclusion for the work that they're doing? So then I'll have to point to the contractor above that sub and say, well, this is what they did, so it's on you. So it can get pretty complex, yes.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very interesting. I touch on coverage sometimes. I've even had situations where I've tendered to a snow removal contractor, and then the snow removal contractor comes back and says, well, I have insurance, but I have an exclusion for snow removal. I was like, well, who was reviewing your policies when you signed the dotted line? Like, this is your business.
And a lot of these guys, especially guys at that level, but even some of the medium to large contractors don't know much about insurance. So what do? They go out and get a broker. And, so then a case like that, I'm like, your broker did not do a good job. We can't sue them because we're not a party to that contract, but you can. And then they will do that. But I don't typically like to sue brokers because I think most of them are doing a good job. But you do have, there's no way that a snow removal company should have an exclusion for snow removal. Yeah. But it happens. You're right.
Yeah. Yes, they know that should definitely not be a thing. Well, I just want to close up on a little off topic of what we've been talking about. So, Chris, I know you love New York and you love what you do, but what do you do outside of work? Like what else brings you joy in life? And Sherry, you're next, so start thinking.
What I think I love sports. So I love going to a Yankees game, or I love basketball. I love going to a Knicks game. Brooklyn over here, they've got a great team. I love doing that. I have softball teams here at work, and basketball teams and volleyball teams, and I love doing all of that. And just taking walks. New York is a very walkable city, so I love just walking wherever through the neighborhoods and meeting people and seeing things. And I have two kids, two daughters, and I love them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I try, although I work like 10, 12 hours a day sometimes, but most people tell me I have no life. That's not true. I do try and moderate things and do a lot of different things outside of the job.
And I don't know if this is your flag. Is that a Steelers flag behind you?
Yes, it is. It's underneath a Giants banner. And I have a friend that works in the insurance company. She's a huge Steelers fan.
Okay.
And she said, well, I'm going to send you a Steelers towel. And I said, send it, I'll put it up. And sure enough, she sent it. And I hope she's looking at this podcast so she can see there it is.
I wanted to see if you're being really truthful about your love for New York, but yes, Pittsburgh as well.
Yeah. I'm a Denver Broncos fan, of course.
Well, yes.
They're number one, but then the Giants and the Jets, and then I look at other teams too. I made that promise for her, and so she will see that.
Well, I hope she tunes in and sees it. You're gonna have to tag her in the comments.
I will.
How about you, Sherry?
What do I like to do for fun outside of work? LinkedIn, is that
that doesn't count.
Option, or is that work? Okay, no, I do. I love my LinkedIn crew and just chatting it up and having a good time. But like Chris, I love walking around the city. I love walking around New York. Every morning I take a walk in Central Park, or sometimes I walk at Carl Schurz Park, which is near where I live. It's a great walkable city, and it's just very historical, and you can learn so much. And I just love walking around. I also am a big reader, so you can usually find me reading. Sometimes I'll just be on a park bench and one of our beautiful parks and reading when the weather's nice. And I have 10-year-old twins, so that is like a pretty busy endeavor as well.
Yeah, actually, you're in a different location today. Usually you have your bookshelf behind you, and I'm always trying to read all your book finds.
They're homeschooling today, so yes, they are homeschooling. But just circling back to their New York City public schools, and this is something like we had to understand, like what New York City, what the schools were dealing with. So there were people getting angry. There were people upset at, since the beginning of the pandemic, but I always kind of had the attitude like, wow, these are like very crowded schools anyway, and everyone's doing the best they can in a very unusual situation. And we're doing okay. We're going back to school the 15th for 5 days. So Go New York City Public Schools.
Great to hear.
And then I'll be in front of the bookshelf more often podcasting instead of my bedroom.
Well, it's been a pleasure having both of you on. Thank you so much for joining us. Chris, I can't thank you enough. I loved hearing about, your career and just, and with both of you digging into, defending a public entity and how it's just different. And I love just hearing your stories about New York. So if you want to come on again, we could just talk about New York the whole time.
I'll be happy.
Have to get Steven Schenker on for that.
Oh,
episode. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Just educate me. All right, guys. Have a great one. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Megan.
Thanks so much, Megan. Bye, Chris.
Thanks, guys.
Nice to see you guys.